Welcome to Tech This Way.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, pretty good, man. Yourself?
Yep, good.
Hold up and safe, I hope.
Yes, indeed.
Anyway, thanks for making the time.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So generally with these things, what I really want to do in this session is to get to know Mr. Azran Osman Grani a little bit more, beyond the
Okay.
headlines.
Okay. Wow.
You can go as far back as you want, to the most formative times in your life, and then we go from there.
Wow. Okay. All right. Let's see. Do you like edit, or it's like completely free flow the whole?
It's free flow, the whole thing. So um,
Okay.
I understand if you have to pause and think before you say anything.
Okay. So but even the pauses will get recorded, lah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see. Video, audio. Okay. Yeah.
All good, all good.
Cool.
So tell me about yourself. Where did it all begin for you?
Where did it all begin for me?
On the okay, specifically on the journey of entrepreneurship and the exciting stuff.
Okay. I think I've always been kind of like a restless soul with a very short attention span. If you think about it, even in university, what did I study? Didn't really matter. I just wanted to travel. And in fact, engineering was just the path of least pain, right? Because medicine, can't stand the sight of blood, and these guys study for like 10 years. Law and accounting, they don't even have colored pictures in their textbooks. So engineering it was, but I never practiced a single day as an engineer, right? In fact,
Where
even
did
in
you
university,
Where did you go?
Stanford in California.
Okay. Oh, nice, cool.
So the cool thing about that system is I could take the minimum number possible of engineering classes just to get that piece of paper, and everything else was history, psychology, economics, even like ballroom dancing and sailing, just to get breath and to meet different people. But also, I think what's interesting about that system is, it was a big culture shock where you are evaluated not on whether you can memorize ideas, but how do you argue new ideas and challenge existing knowledge. Number one,
No.
you've got to debate it, right?
Yeah.
So like, how do you write papers to advance human thinking was the whole theme around this, right? And so that meant, well, wow, okay, so I'm not just supposed to understand the textbook, but how do I challenge the textbook? So I thought that was a very interesting foundation. And in a way, the first 10 years of my professional career, consulting in a way builds that. And frankly, the only reason why I started on that path was because someone told me, hey, you get to do different things, right? Different projects, different industries, different clients, different geographies. And that appealed to me, right? Rather than kind of staying and doing one thing in one industry for a long time. So again, that theme of breadth. But also, I think because as a consultant, if you don't really immerse yourself in whichever industry or project you're in, very soon people are going to call you out and say, hey, look, there's nothing that you're bringing to the table. So how then do you learn to jump in and learn a new domain as quickly as possible, right? And then be able to challenge how things are being done, in the existing status quo.
Which
So interestingly,
consultancy was that?
so I initially started with Booz and then moved over to McKinsey. And
There in the US, or did you come back?
no, so in the mid 90s, I think the US was still barely coming out of the recession, whereas Southeast Asia was go boom years, right? So it was a no-brainer then, but that meant I missed Yahoo, I missed Google, and all of that. That was all after my time. But of course, as much as it was go in the mid 1990s, that suddenly boom, 97, 98 happens, and the world tumbled upside down. And that meant also learning how do you keep pivoting and changing, right? So for example, because I started with an engineering background, typically consulting those days was two practices: financial institutions and everything else, right? And so I was under everything else. So I worked in steel manufacturing, oil and gas, petrochemicals, power generation, telcos. But then 97, 98 happened. And, there was an opportunity to serve a bank in Thailand in credit management strategy to basically work out all the loans that were crumbling one after the other after July 2nd, 1997, when the baht devalued, right? That triggered the whole Asian financial crisis. So how do you suddenly learn everything possible about the banking system and then realizing that everything you've learned doesn't apply anymore because of the global financial crisis then? But after that, suddenly things came to a grinding halt again. And I even had to relocate to Korea because that's where a lot of the chaebol restructuring work was going on. And how do you then suddenly have to fit into a completely, new culture that's not exactly the most open culture to foreigners, right? And on top of that, in nuclear power, right? So that was,
and this
so
was the days before K-pop and all that to keep you entertained, right?
Days before K-pop, right? All I know was, okay, if ever the client took me out for lunch at the seafood restaurant next to the power plant, I'm like, I better count the number of eyes on the fish. But so in life, sometimes, my story has been one of serendipity and opportunities that somehow came up. From struggling to fit into the environment in Korea, I actually really enjoyed it. For the first time, I had really meaningful client relationships there, to the point where we decided we wanted to permanently transfer to Seoul. And I remember sitting down with the managing partner in Seoul saying, I want to move from kind of this whole 1-year assignment to being a permanent member of McKinsey Seoul, right? And just as we're having that conversation, the phone rings. And it's a partner in Southeast Asia who said, we've just, gotten the mandate to help the Kuala Lumpur Stock Exchange demutualize and privatize itself. And it's probably going to be a very political, a lot of stakeholder management. And Azran being one of the most senior Malaysians in McKinsey, can we have him back? I'm like, oh, okay. Maybe I'll come down for phase 1, 6-8 weeks, help them kick it off. But I really want to go back to Korea. And in life, I never went back till today. Somewhere in the storage space in Seoul is my rice cooker, my toaster, my stereo, all those things that I never went back to claim.
What was it about Korea that appealed to you?
Well, I think, first it is the, to be somehow for the first time, I really felt being in this inner circle of, being accepted as a trusted counselor to one of the families there. And also a project that I thought was really incredible, which was a 3-way joint venture, right? They wanted to put together this joint venture with a European partner and an American partner. So 3 different cultures. So there was the whole corporate finance setup. How do you set up the decision-making process? How do you actually run a 3-party joint venture and, and operationalize it? So that was really fascinating, in nuclear power on top of it, right? But what started off as, okay, let me, do my duty for the Kuala Lumpur Stock Exchange. I got to work under Dr. Azran Hashim, right, who was then the executive chairman, and an incredible guy, really inspiring. And it was, of course, an incredibly challenging piece of work. And then after we planned everything, he said, okay, Azran, look, we got to move fast. No one really understands how a commercialized stock exchange is supposed to operate. And I can't really afford McKinsey fees anymore. Pulled the national service card on me and said, can you come and help me implement everything that you've put in PowerPoint, right? And oh, by the way, I can probably only pay you half of what McKinsey pays you. So you need to take a 50% pay cut, right? But that opportunity, right? The first time in my career is when someone says, can you actually implement what you recommend, right? Like that whole, throwing that challenge at me, because I want to come back to this theme, right? When people throw you a challenge, you're like, okay, right? And I took it on board, and I remember, okay, just stick to driving a Proton car, stick to counting how much we spend on bread and milk, to just kind of, massive change in lifestyle, right? Like a 50% salary reduction. But it was the best year and a half to like actually see that whole process through. We had to pass 5 bills in Parliament, and I saw how Parliament works. But sometimes it does,
Or don't,
and
yeah.
and actually make it happen. So incredibly proud of that. And when we got that done, he said, "So I think you should stay and be the chief financial officer of this new public listed company, but I'm going to step back and retire." And I'm like, "But I joined because of you, right?" And again, as we were talking about it, another phone call rings, and a friend of mine said, "Hey, you know, Astro just completed its first IPO back in 2003, and they're also looking to go from being a Malaysian company to an international company, and they want someone to help lead all these international business development initiatives." Like, oh, okay, I don't know anything about media and entertainment, but they've just raised 2 billion ringgit. So how do you spend 2 billion ringgit? I'm like, okay, let's give that a shot, right? So I did, and that was also quite an interesting journey, right? How do you, for example, find yourself in Jakarta trying to negotiate shareholders agreement with local partners, sit in that hotel room and decide, okay, now you got a piece of paper. How do you start to build a team? Like, where are you going to recruit employee number one? Where's the office space initially? And 10 months later, we had 450 employees who started building 5 local Indonesian channels, including Astro Awani and Astro Ceria. They were built first in Indonesia and later brought back to Astro Malaysia.
For the local market over there.
For the local market over there, right? Like, how do you build a national broadcast center and set up national distribution systems all in like a year? So that was a great experience of moving fast, right? But then suddenly, another random phone call. Another friend says, "Hey, do you know this guy, Tony Fernandez? He's kind of heard about you and would like to have a conversation with you." So I'm like, "Oh, okay, let's go see what this guy has to say." And Tony, one thing you got to credit him is he's really good at pitching you a good deal, right?
I'm sure. Yeah.
What would it take to do something that no one in the entire aviation industry believes is possible, right? Like that whole, when someone throws you that challenge, you're like, okay, tell me more, right? And he talked about how, long haul, there must be a big opportunity because there's 3 billion people beyond Southeast Asia that we could fly to that we're not serving just because we're staying with these small planes flying short distances within Southeast Asia. But the industry believes it cannot be done, right?
How many years of Air Asia was then at that point? When did they start?
So they took over, I think, around December 2001. So it's been 6 years. They'd already been a publicly listed company by 2004. I think like probably about 50 planes in the fleet. And so quite an established operation and credit, right, in a very short period of about 5-6 years. But then the next level, oh, well, very like maybe we shouldn't be doing it. And so Tony said, okay, fine, let's set up AirAsiaX as a separate company first, right? Now, okay, good idea. You want to come in? By the way, I don't want to hire you as an employee. How much money you got, right? Like, you got to buy shares. Like, I don't believe in stock options, right? Because stock options only have an upside. There's no downside, right? So how much money you got? Okay, let me arrange a loan so that you buy enough shares. And if this doesn't work, you're going to sacrifice your kids' education.
It's a true partnership, right?
Yeah, right. So I felt that was important because the alignment of ownership really made a difference, right? Because unsurprisingly, almost every 2 years without fail, there was a crisis, an existential crisis. And, an employee would have walked away. But, when you're in there, you got to like fight and beg and do anything you can just to carry on, right? Because you're in and you're in deep. So that whole process of first, okay, you've got a great idea and you got to go out and, by the way, convince investors, right? We had to raise institutional money. It wasn't AirAsia's money, right? And just when you raise money, boom, 2008 happens, global financial crisis, banks started pulling out credit lines, material adverse circumstance, force majeure, all those things you never pay attention in legal agreements. I had to live that, right, in 2008, 2009, right? And just like one crisis after the other, this fight until 2013 when we listed it. And again, just when you think, oh, okay, finally, right? Like we raised, I think about 1 billion ringgit from that 2013 IPO. Okay, great. Then 2014 comes, boom, right? Massive crash in the aviation industry, and again, like fighting for survival. So as in life, just when you think you finally crawl yourself out of a deep hole, you get up, boom, it's going to knock you down again and knock you down again, right? And so after that, Patrick gave me a call and said, hey, bro, I heard you're leaving the airline and I've got this crazy idea, right, to call iFlix and, come, let's have a chat and have a coffee. I remember from a breakfast meeting by the afternoon, like no idea what the terms are. We shook hands. Let's do this. Let's build this.
So I guess
And
Asia would have been your first trip into entrepreneurship, right? Because that's when you stop being the regular salary guy. And
exactly. That's right. Yeah, because Astro teaches me how to build a business from scratch, but in a way, I'm an employee still, right?
So then that, I guess, whet your appetite to look at other opportunities, which is more entrepreneurship in nature then, right? So then...
Yeah, because once you start to build something from scratch, right? Like it is incredibly addictive, right? Like that whole adrenaline rush. First, you got to like convince investors. Then you have capital. How do you actually, bet on teams, especially? How do you grow it quickly to get to that next milestone? Now you got to raise again, spend it, raise it again, like never ending.
So how different or similar is iFlix to your experience at Astro? Because I guess that's within, at least in the media space, right? So, but now it's mostly...
there are some similarities. But I think in this case, interestingly, it's how do you make things as ridiculously affordable and accessible for everyone, especially what we would call the non-Astro segment, right? People who won't even have a flat screen TV or a satellite TV subscription. And even then, right, just to give you an example, just like AirAsia X, where boom, someone gives you money, you build a business, boom, global financial crisis happens and business plans get thrown out the door and you have to rebuild again. iFlix, we had a business plan, okay, only 10 ringgit a month, right? And surely that's much more affordable. Turns out within a few months after launching, after spending millions of ringgit on content rights, no one wanted to pay 10 ringgit a month for a subscription, right? They stayed with that free tier. No one wanted to upgrade into the paid tier model.
Was there Netflix at that point? I can't remember.
It was, but they hadn't launched the international version. That was only in 2016, right?
Okay.
By that time, it was mostly BitTorrent, right? Like people would say, like, if you want me to pay, I'd rather pirate. But if you give it for me for free with a good user experience and all that, I'll watch it.
So that was your competitor then, lah. Actually, it wasn't even Astro. It was the free downloads. It was
actually,
right?
Even the DVD, folks from Pangsar and Jalan Raja Chula and all that, right? They're so sophisticated. They even had loyalty systems, right? Like you buy 10 DVDs, one, they send you reminders. Hey, we've got new title, bro. Like buy it, right? So that's how people used to consume content. Now, so imagine we launched it and suddenly no one wants to pay, right? All your revenue projections thrown out the window. And someone came and said, oh, you're Azran, right? Like iFlix guy. Hey, love your service. I'm on my 4th free trial. So they realized, these guys have had iFlix, right? Like after 30 days, I just sign up for a new free trial. After 30 days, I just sign up for a new free trial. And that's where that big pivot came in, which is, well, clearly at least they want to watch it. They want to consume it. They just didn't want to pay for it. And who then would benefit if people wanted to watch TV? And just somehow through conversations, you connect dots and say, hey, telcos, right? Because telcos in 2015 were also going through a massive transformation because voice and SMS revenues were evaporating, right? And only data was growing, and video is the most data intensive application. Now, initially, right, if you approach any telco, they say, oh, you are an OTT provider. Okay, go see our head of digital services, right? And you're one of 100 services. They'll tell you, here's a standard agreement. It's called a carrier billing agreement. you sign here. We offer it to either prepaid or postpaid customers. We collect the money, we give you 70%, we keep 30%. But we say, yeah, that's not going to work because people don't want to pay. Well, that's your problem, not mine, right? I've got 100 other digital apps to promote. But when we finally got to the top leadership of these telcos, right, and position it not just as a digital product, but their biggest worry is churn, right? 80% of mobile telco subscribers are prepaid. And the average churn rate for prepaid subscribers is 50%, right? In 6 months, they leave, right? And then how do you increase your revenue per user when, when price of data and voice and SMS is coming down? And so we said, look, no, it's not just video, but it's TV series. So it's not even movies, because TV series create stickiness. And if someone gets hooked on a TV series and they stay from 6 months to 7 months on average, that's worth at least 30 ringgit, right? And if you give it to them for free, if it stimulates 2 gigabytes of data, in 2015, 2 gigabytes of data might be worth 20 ringgit, right? And so if the subscription price for iFlix on a wholesale basis, say it's 7 ringgit, that's a good deal. But that's a conversation you need to have with the top leadership, not head of digital services.
Sure.
Right. And that's how we started. The first telco said, okay, let's try this out, right? Let's do it for 2 million postpaid subscribers with at least 50 ringgit a month. And then we measure how much incremental data usage for those that got iFlix versus those that didn't. And that's how suddenly it became the new business case emerged, as opposed to everything in that first business plan thrown out of the window.
But going back to the first business plan, surely there were, I don't know, research and studies that you guys did to come to that price point and say, yep, people will pay 10. Even 10 sounds cheap, right? It's like $10.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
But that's the thing. See, research, when you ask someone, they're just kind of giving you an impulsive thought, right? But the real test is putting out in the market and actually seeing how people behave, because how people behave with the product is different from how they'll tell you. So that's why I generally am not a big believer of market surveys, but how fast can we go into the market and then learn what works, what doesn't work, and then change the whole business plan if need be.
So if you could do it again, how would you do it differently with iFlix?
Well, I think, so interestingly, that whole telco industry has moved on, right? I think today, 2021 is a very different conversation than 2015, because price of data has significantly come down and, so many more applications. So I think you have to look at it completely from scratch, from a very different view than just how it was in 2015.
Oh, no, what
right?
I meant was, if you were to have done iFlix again from the start, and
you mean from 2015?
Yeah. And
yeah, but that's a very theoretical question, Amran, because you don't know, right?
You would have approached it the same way, right? Because the data sounds good, you would have just gone through.
I think it's just first, really, if you define the right problem, but you shouldn't fall in love with your plan or your approach, right? Being prepared to just throw it out the window when you know it's not working, and then just learning how to rebuild quickly.
And I guess that's the key, that iterative, right? Being iterative very quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, so then from iFlix, was it Naluri after?
Yeah, it was. I mean,
so what was the tail end of iFlix, if you don't mind?
Well, I think, for me, once it did Series C, was it like 90 or $120 million raised, and it became quite institutional, right? Like it was, okay, now how do we figured out Southeast Asia. Now, how do we copy and paste and open up Middle East and Africa? So it became a lot more structured. And at the same time, in that process, I had went back to Stanford, caught up with some friends, and one of them was a founder of another startup, a health tech startup in San Francisco. And when he was explaining to me what he did, I was like, oh, that's very similar to what I do, except you are using digital to get people addicted to healthy lifestyles. I'm using digital to get them hooked onto TV series, right? So I think that's probably, a more interesting problem set. And I think where it connected with me was when I realized that the way they were explaining to me is because the problem with healthcare is that it's so siloed, right? Everyone is a specialist, right? So if you see a cardiologist, she's only going to look at your heart. An oncologist only looks at your cancer. A gastroenterologist only looks at your gut. Dietitian looks at your food, right? Or a psychologist looks at your mental health. When I started to learn about this whole interconnectedness, especially between physical health and mental health, the light bulb moment came to me when I reflected back on my late father, right? Because when we lost him in 2011 to both diabetes and cancer, right? That progression, right? As his condition deteriorated, right? We now learn, oh, when someone goes through that, there is a lot of depression and anxiety, but the healthcare system was just focused on chemo, meds, surgery, as opposed to right, the physical aspects, right, as opposed to really helping someone improve their mental health and well-being as they're going through that journey. And we, at that point, no one even knew what mental health was. So interestingly, I locked onto this whole problem statement of the intersection between physical health and mental health, and how can digital be used to try to tackle that particular problem. Now, back in 2017, before a single code was written, we spent, I remember like seeing about 60 people in the industry to say, hey, I've got this crazy idea. Is this problem that I want to tackle relevant to you? Right? And if it is, here's how I plan to tackle it. Is it different from what you're already doing? Right? And suddenly in that process, we discovered, if you go talk to an employer or an insurance company about mental health, no interest, right? But diabetes and heart disease, yes, right? That's 60-70% of their recurring medical expense claims. So in a way, we said, okay, well, maybe if that's the market focus, in a way, our psychological and behavioral health approach is helping those who are wrestling with diabetes and heart conditions by improving their mindsets and motivations and getting them to change their lifestyles, right? So in a way, diabetes and heart disease was the Trojan horse, where mental health was with these Greek soldiers hiding in that Trojan horse. But with COVID, everything flipped again, right? Because suddenly with COVID, mental health became front and center, because suddenly employers now were seeing how, employees were facing burnout and depression and disengagement with work from home, with the uncertainties of COVID, and we had to completely flip the program.
So
right?
at the start of Naluri, so who's we at that point? Was it just you who came back with that idea and then you started, looking around?
Yeah. Well, so what I learned, so key message first is who are you going to do this with, right? With AirAsia X, what I really learned from AirAsia X was having a Moses. So Moses to me was the key factor, right? It's not AirAsia X isn't Azran, it's Moses. Moses, interestingly, joined me as my chief operating officer, right? We worked together. We even drove to the airport every day in the same car. Now, Moses had just retired from Malaysia Airlines after spending 36 years working there. So he'd been in the aviation industry the same number of years as I had been born. But what made Moses unique, despite the most people who've been in one industry for 30 years, he didn't have very dogmatic views about how things should be done. But when I throw crazy ideas, Moses will say, oh, okay, interesting. But if you want to tackle that, you need to address this, this, and this. And it's that industry insight knowledge, right, that I wouldn't have discovered as an outsider. And even if you could then figure it out, Moses has the ability to call people around the world to make things happen because he's got 30 years of relationships, right? Which was incredibly valuable. So that taught me about how do you put together teams that have these very complementary skill sets, experience, especially that industry depth. Now, with iFlix, what Patrick did was to pair me with Mark Britt. Mark had built internet television in Australia, but he had no experience in Southeast Asia, right? So he knew exactly, okay, these are the things we need to do to build internet TV. So when I wanted to start Naluri, the first thing I did was, okay, part of the 60 different people I talked to, I went back to my former colleagues at McKinsey to say, hey guys, I've got this crazy idea. What do you guys think, right? And this is life, right? Like Dian Yi, who was my mentee when I was in McKinsey, today or 2017, she was already a senior partner. And she goes, oh, you need to speak to Jeremy, right? Like he's also obsessed about digital health. So let me connect the two of you. So Jeremy was still in McKinsey, and he's a medical doctor by training, practiced in the UK, Australia, and then spent the last, I don't know, like 6-7 years in the healthcare practice of McKinsey. So he had a lot of industry depth, right? But at the same time, there's this common language of how do we use digital to change how things are done, right? And I think that I think was probably the foundation that I picked up, right? Like how do you find teams with that different experiences, but at the same time you have a common factor, right? Common values, so that you can work together. Because otherwise, you just put 5 random people in a room, you might just kind of tear each other out, right?
Yeah. So then you got Jeremy in to advise you, or he actually joined you to set this up?
Yeah, no. So I said, look, we're gonna do this. How much money you got? How much money you got? Right? Let's put it in, right? Let's do this all the way. Yeah.
Okay. So then, so tell me more about Naluri itself then, So how did that grow from that idea to meeting up with, insurance companies and all those kind of stuff?
So this is where the lessons from AirAsiaX and iFlix, right? So remember, iFlix, no one wanted to pay for iFlix, right? And so you had to find a telco. Similarly here, if you go to Malaysians and say, hey, would you like to pay to get healthier and, lose weight and improve your blood sugar? Nah, no, thank you. I'd rather spend it on my Starbucks, right? But who's worried when people are spending money on Starbucks coffee? Their employer and their insurer, because they're the ones who have to foot the medical bill, right? So this B2B2C model of Naluri came from that iFlix experience. And this is interesting because as we talked to our last round of investors, right, they say, well, most digital health companies start from a consumer angle, but you guys started with that B2B corporate angle, right? And so I think that came from that learning part of iFlix.
To build that ecosystem where you can get to your customers.
Right. And again, therefore, that meant if you wanted to do B2B, first you have to recognize it is a longer sales cycle, right? You got to sort of convince someone. And therefore, in the first year, we basically just spent a lot of time with working with just 3 organizations, right? A couple of insurance companies and one of the biggest corporates in Malaysia, to really show, okay, this is what we can do. And when they were happy and they started renewing us for the second year in 2019, then it became easier to go from 3 clients to 30 clients, because now you've got a reference data set and experiences and all that, right? So that's why for me, it's not so much about chasing revenue for the sake of revenue, but really demonstrating what you can do first and then using it and being able to win the others over.
And you were saying how at that point, I guess, 2 years ago, the concern has always been the physical, the medication,
That's right,
to address those issues, right? And okay, the mental health game was, well, hopefully you're okay, right? When you're physically okay. Then COVID came, as you started saying, right? So COVID came. How did that impact you guys, right? Because that's, as you said, it's a big shift, right? Suddenly now, being stuck at home, okay, let's focus on mental health.
Well, initially March, April, May, we were in trouble because suddenly a lot of our projects were put on hold, because normally with diabetes, right? And diabetes, heart disease, you have to start with a blood test, right? You have to establish a baseline. But no one was available for blood tests because everyone was under real lockdown, right? And most companies were going, hey, look, we need to reassess what we're going to do. And 100% focus was COVID. And we had to, Jeremiah, stop paying ourselves, slash salaries, but we wanted to, in a way, take the brunt of it amongst our management team so that we maintain salaries for the junior staff, right? Because for them, that would have been a much bigger issue for them, right? But by June, July, then suddenly we started getting calls, right? Like, hey, look, I'm seeing signs from my employees. What can you guys do to help? And the whole, kind of mental health employee assistance program started to get developed. And by September, monthly revenues were 3x the highest pre-COVID. So it just literally like that June, July, August, September, it just exploded because of a lot of these big organizations saying, like, we really need something to take care of our employees. It has to be digital because everyone's remote, and we really need something that we can quantify and measure and easily access.
Nice. So, in fact, I don't think we even covered what Naluri is and what it does. So what is Naluri? Apart from the fact that it does something with mental health digitally.
Yeah, well, it's maybe, if I were bold, right? We imagine it to be healthcare 3.0. So if healthcare 1.0 is you have to go to a physical clinic or hospital, right? Okay. And healthcare 2.0 is telemedicine, like what we're conversing right now on a Zoom type platform. But it's still a one-on-one conversation, and it's still episodic or transactional. But the problem with chronic conditions like diabetes or heart disease or even mental health, one conversation doesn't fix anything. One prescription doesn't fix anything. You need structured ongoing care. So you got to now define what we call either like a chronic disease management program. How do you start? What's week 2? What's week 3? What's week 4? It's a kind of a programmatic approach. And then the second big challenge of the difference between what we call healthcare 2.0 and healthcare 3.0 is moving from that siloed specialist model to a multidisciplinary model. So meaning, instead of seeing one specialist, whether it's your cardiologist or your psychologist, let me give you a team, right? Your psychologist, your dietitian, your fitness coach, your doctor, your pharmacist, and we even added executive coaches and financial planners because those are the 2 main stress triggers. But this team, more importantly, work together, coordinated to help you, the user, as at the center, right? Rather than you seeing individual specialists, the team has notes and everything coordinating your personalized care. And the third way is, how do we move the industry from paying for a service or an activity, right, per consultation or per prescription, to paying for an outcome, right? Because if we can measure your health pre-post, right, and we now build models to quantify that, right? What is the value of bringing down your blood sugar from 6.5 to 6.0? Because it reduces your future risks of diabetes and medication, and even, down the line, dialysis and all those things, right? There's like, you can model out those costs, right, on a population basis. So then it becomes clearer for the payers in the industry to say, oh, okay, so spend this much, that might be my expected cost savings, right? So that's what we do, is how do we provide this in a programmatic way for people that we can help identify them at the early stages. So don't wait until they are clinically depressed and they can't function at work anymore, but find the early signs and symptoms and take care of them, right? Don't wait until they are already on a dialysis machine, but if they already have elevated blood sugars, what can we do now to reduce the probability of that, let's say 100 people with that profile, where 50% of them might end up on a dialysis machine 5-10 years from now.
So pre-COVID, that storyline, right, of let's catch them early before it goes bad, does that resonate with companies, or would companies still feel like, nah, prevention before the cure? I know, but they start costing me now anyway. So
yeah. So interestingly, in pre-COVID, the reason why, first of all, we had to tackle it as physical health and mental health together is because if you went to any company saying, hey, let me help you with your mental health, everybody says, no, go away, please, right? But if we say, hey, look, let's make you healthier and perform better, right? And we measure your blood pressure and your cholesterol, blood sugar, and your weight, but we also assess your depression, anxiety, and stress. And you can see the correlation. And even at that stage, right, I can, to make it precise, we can then work with the organization to say, okay, let's say these people have these risk factors, right? Go back the last 3 years. Let's help you dig up what's the average cost in terms of direct medical claims cost or indirect sick leave. Like how many additional days of sick leave did they take, right? Turns out, let's say if you had high blood pressure, high blood sugar, high cholesterol, you're overweight, and you've got elevated depression and anxiety, you're costing your company about 20,000 ringgit a year. right? If you had 4 out of those 5 factors, you're probably about 11,000 ringgit a year. If you got 3 out of 5, you're probably 6,000 ringgit a year. 2 out of 5, 4,000, right? So if we then find, let's say, 200 people, right? And on average, these 200 people cost that organization 6,000 ringgit a year. And as we help them, if that average moves from 3 out of 5 to 2 out of 5, that means you're moving that cohort from 6,000 ringgit a year to 4,000 ringgit a year. So that's roughly a 2,000 ringgit a year savings. So what would be a fair payment for that sort of performance, right? So that
Sorry, Azran, I kind of lost you there.
So do you want me to repeat that?
Yeah,
or?
just go to the point where you were saying what was the fair compensation then for the avoidance of the cost. Yeah.
So basically for us, once you establish a value that you can create on a population basis, because not everyone that you enroll is going to get healthy, right? But just like if you take them all to a doctor, you're lucky 50% of them actually follow through what the doctor tells them to do and gets healthy. But on that cohort, right, if you can create a 2,000 ringgit a year type savings, right, what sort of fee that, let's say, generates a 4x, a 5x return on investment, that becomes clear, right? So it's much more of a, almost like a no-brainer, right? The economics make a lot of sense at that level. But you've got to work hard to collect that data. And imagine, right? Data is not clean, right? Data is pieces of paper and, you know, claims and everything. It's a lot of tough work. But the more we do that and the more that feeds into a model, it becomes a lot easier for future work, because now the model is a lot more robust with, you know, thousands of data points.
And then you deploy your mental health army through the Trojan horse, right? To do what you really wanted to do, which is to help people from a mental health standpoint.
That's right. Yeah.
And now with COVID, suddenly you don't need the Trojan horse anymore, because, you know, like you say, mental health is on the forefront. So how do you then arrange that with customers?
So same thing, right? Because I think first is because we can put numbers, like there is a depression score, or an anxiety score, or a stress score, right? Many times corporate leaders see, wow, like, okay, this is my profile, right? Let's say typically 40% have normal levels of depression, but 60% have elevated levels, of which 20% are at pretty serious levels. Same profiles with anxiety, stress slightly less. So if you know that as your starting point, what sort of improvements can I expect to see after 4 months, after 12 months? And then I can start to match this against other measures like employee engagement, employee performance, right? So that I can then see the relationship. Whereas if I don't do anything, I'm seeing heightened turnover, I'm seeing lost productivity, I'm seeing higher sick leave, and you can go and put numbers to that.
Yeah. So I guess from your observation standpoint of the workforce in Malaysia during COVID, do you see that marked rise in mental health issues?
Yeah, it's about 40 to 50%. And interestingly, there's a generational difference. Satu generational difference, which means people under 30 had a much higher spike in depression and anxiety than people above 40. Right? So if I just look at those two age groups, right? There's a generational difference. There's differences by geography. Let's say, you know, Kelantan, Sarawak, KL, interestingly, higher than, you know, Penang, Johor. And also by job functions, right? Certain job functions had higher spikes, especially, unfortunately, legal, audit, you know, risk management had higher spikes.
So if you look at the generational differences, what could that be attributed to? Why are the younger ones more stressed out and the older guys are happy to stay home?
Well, it's not so much happy. It's, you know, how we grew and developed. Now, there are actually multiple factors. So it's not easy to summarize it, because clearly there are even things like financial stress, because unfortunately cost of living has outstripped wage increases, right? So the pressure of joining the workforce now and getting only like 2,500, 3,000 ringgit a month salary is much more intense than what we used to do, because that number wasn't that far when we first started, right? In the 1990s.
Yeah.
But one interesting factor that has come up again and again is overwhelming choice and constant distraction. You see, when we grew up, I don't know if you remember, 1984 was a seminal year. Why? Because we got the third TV channel, TV3, right? Right? And you could watch MacGyver and Airwolf and all that shows, right?
Yeah.
Today, right, kids are growing up, and whatever TV series you want where you can watch it instantaneously, you will be missing out on so many things. When we used to shop, going to, like Jalan Toko Brahma was like the big deal, and it was like this one shopping complex. Today, with Lazada, Shopee, you're overwhelmed with choice. Even when it comes to, who can I go out, right? Let's say last time, if you grew up in St. John's, your sphere is just CBN, right? But now with Tinder, like it's just unlimited. So the problem sometimes with too many choices is whatever I have, I feel like I might be missing out, right? So I'm never settled, right? And on top of that, because we're constantly being bombarded with notifications, my attention span is a lot more like all over the place, right? And unfortunately, the more the brain keeps going from one to the other, the more it starts to just contemplate things that are not my present situation. Right? And that's where that spike comes up. And what it does say is that leadership has to change in this period. We can't lead our teams the way our bosses used to lead us 20 years ago. So our jobs as leaders now is not to kind of tell people what they need to do, but the most important thing we can do is provide them an anchor in an environment where, there's all this proliferation of choice and notifications and everything. And that anchor is a strong sense of purpose. Because I think both you and I know that when the younger generation, when they find something that they feel really connected to, a lot of energy can be unleashed, right? So there's a lot of tremendous potential, but you've got to help them find that anchor, right? Find that sense of purpose so that they can really just channel their effort. Without that, and if they just see work as it just kind of pays me the salary, and I will constantly keep looking for something else. Because
So
you're grown up always looking at those options, right?
Yeah. And I guess suddenly now, if you confine back to work from home, perhaps that feeling of missing out is even more intensified, right? I'm stuck here. There could be stuff out there that we should be doing, right?
Exactly. Yes.
So I guess to bring this back a little bit to yourself, your own journey, right? So it's to date, I guess you've spent, you've been doing things, as you say, like serendipity, right? You get the call and it happens to be exciting stuff that you're going to do. I guess Naluri is probably the first one where you actually guided yourself, your own path to do this, right?
From that blank sheet of paper.
That's right. Yeah. So then the question is, okay, is this the passion still there? You still see a long runway with Naluri, or are you itching now to start looking for?
No, look, I think where this is really exciting is because today we can see like real life stories of people who've made really just transform their lives, right? From maybe someone who's gonna really struggle, overweight, feeling depressed, and in like 4 to 6 months you see them completely now in control of their lives. I think that is the kind of reward that goes far beyond kind of just the business reason why you want to create and build businesses. And so that impact, and then unfortunately, like every day now, right, you see like people in their 30s now getting heart attacks, right? People are not able to function at work anymore, right? Just so the amount of people that need help is just staggering. And I think especially with what has also really, what I'm trying to build as a progression from AirAsia X to iFlix to Naluri now is, how do we find something that's really tailored to the mass market segment in our emerging markets, right? Like, how do you look at things and say, how do we 10x the cost, right? 10x the accessibility. And why this becomes really important is in Malaysia alone, right? Here's the stark situation. As a whole country, we only have about 200 plus practicing clinical psychologists. We have about 400 plus practicing psychiatrists. And if the standard telemedicine model of one-on-one, a psychologist is maxed out with 50 clients a month, which means as a whole country, we have the capacity to support 700,000 Malaysians. But between 4 million Malaysians who are really in need of help and 9 million more who are like at that early risk factor, simply kind of graduating people and putting them into the system, we're going to ignore 80% of the population. And that's Malaysia, which means Indonesia, Myanmar, Vietnam, Philippines is double that kind of that scarcity issue, right? So I think really kind of trying to figure out like, how do we keep at this to make it so that, you know, people can actually get access to help in a way that's very different from how help has traditionally been offered, because so many people just don't even have access to it.
So without giving too much away from trade secret standpoint, how do you bridge that gap then to go from 1 to 50 to 1 to 1,000?
Okay. So the first model is, how do you move that conversation from live conversations to a more programmatic conversation? Meaning, so instead of like a one therapy session once every other week, let's have a 5-minute chat each day with text, right? Now, that alone maybe takes you from 50 to 100, but then you don't need Naluri, you can just use WhatsApp. But very soon with WhatsApp, you realize, oh, okay, now if I've got 50 people, do I need to explain the same things over and over again? Do I need to ask the same questions over and over again, right? And when the first version of Naluri, right, the pre-MVP literally was Dr. Haryati, one of our early psychologists. I posted on Facebook, hey, who would like to actually talk to a psychologist about these and these conditions? I got 50 volunteers from my Facebook friends, and she just used WhatsApp, right? And because suddenly you realize very quickly, I'm asking the same things over and over again. And so we had an intern then design on PowerPoint screenshots of like question A, box B, C, D, send it as an image, and then user reply C, then intern sends the next screenshot, right? So at least that process became more efficient. That then became the model for us to create what we call modules. So bite-sized modules, so that if, for example, I wanted to understand your stress triggers in your life, right? I can get you to do, hey, Amran, when you got 5 minutes later today, why don't you do module number 4 on stress triggers? So then you learn a little bit about it. You answer questions like, normally, what time do you sleep? What time do you get up? Do you feel tired? Do you feel refreshed? Do you get stressed out with your boss? Do you get stressed out with work colleagues? Or is it money or family? And that way, as your psychologist, I can then review all your answers and come back to you in a more efficient manner. Now, as we've grown and we've got like 30,000 data points, now you then add the computer models to say, okay, Amran relative to 30,000 other data points will give me, the psychologist, much more powerful insights than I would have been able to figure out on my own. So today, we've gone from that 50 to 1 ratio to 400 to 1 on a blended basis, with some of our most experienced psychologists at 600 to 1. So once we can 10x that productivity, that means we can bring the cost down by 10 times and still manage the same level of effectiveness, right? So going forward, if now we work towards getting from 30,000 data points to 300,000 data points, right? How then, instead of just text, where we start to introduce elements of video so that we can analyze microfacial expressions. And you might tell me, hey, Azran, I'm doing well today. But from your voice, your tone, your temper, your valence, I can detect subtle signs, or the machine can detect subtle signs to tell the psychologist, maybe Amran is not quite okay as what he says, right? Let's probe in this. So the power of that data set it's like a big decision support tool. So you move from the psychologist having to figure out everything in their head and reaching out to you, to one where, okay, this person, I know what to do. This person, I know what to do. So you can standardize the predictable so that you can humanize the exceptional.
Oh, that's a nice phrase. Yeah. So with I'm sure the journey is still ongoing, right? In terms of fine-tuning and getting it a lot more, right? But do you see a day where you will find yourself, okay, we are kind of locked in with the mental health. Let's start moving into the traditional, physical health kind of areas with the same kind of model. Do you see going that way?
Yeah, because ultimately, health doesn't exist in silos, right?
Mm.
And likewise, if you work with an insurance company or you work with a corporate employer, they don't want to say, oh, Azran, that means do I have to work with you on mental health? I have to work with someone else on diabetes? I have to work with someone else on cancer? That's not going to be efficient. So our core focus is what we call behavior health, which means what conditions where your behavior influences your health.
Mm.
And that actually also includes cancer, right? Because what you eat, how you think about your cancer makes a big difference, right? On how fast you go from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3. It makes a difference on renal or kidney conditions, right? It makes a difference with chronic pain, right? Even we're now starting to discover dermatological conditions like psoriasis, because your stress and being overweight can actually worsen your psoriasis, right? So what conditions where behaviors, because that's what we focus on, right? Like understanding your behavior models, the right nudges, the right interventions to get you to take the behavior actions to get you healthy. So what we won't be able to do are genetically genetically induced conditions, autoimmune diseases or acute conditions, like, if you break a leg or anything, right? So there's a big chunk of healthcare that we won't touch, but things that relate to behavior, I think that's probably where we would want to focus on.
Unless it's patients who keep breaking their leg and they're taking too many risks, then it's like, I think it's mental there too. Yeah. So I guess last question for me, it's
Sure.
almost come to the hour now, is so you started this with a B2B model, right? B2B to C.
Yeah.
Right. And as you scale up, I'm assuming naturally then you can go B2C because you've got enough, the mechanisms there to support one-to-one.
It's a question of capital, right? With B2C today, you want to put ads on Google, on Facebook, on search everything. You are competing with Grab ads and Carsome ads and Fave ads and all that, right? So customer acquisition costs are not cheap anymore, right? Like everybody's going digital. So I think we want to go that way, but Series A, we're still small, right? At Series B, Series C, there's a lot, your war chest goes bigger. But where we want to start doing now is, okay, there's a little bit of capital. How do we make smart bets on direct to consumer rather than trying to kind of create a broad based approach? Trying to build a consumer brand from scratch, I think is very costly.
And I guess the market for the B2B is still very big.
It's still there, right? Like that's your space. It's there's a lot of opportunity there.
Although we run by SMEs, but there's still a lot of people under employment in large corporates.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if I can ask, what's the next plan for this year, next year? Then any short term things that's happening?
Well, so I think what we're most excited about, number one, it's as a Malaysian company, Malaysia is small, right? Like we have to learn how to scale and go internationally more than the Indonesians do or the Filipinos do or the Vietnamese do, because we don't have a domestic market, right? So I think going deeper into Indonesia and Singapore where we've started, and this year starting Thailand and Philippines, that's one theme. The second theme, I think, is how do we then build our clinical evidence? Because of all the different stakeholders we deal with, doctors are probably the most conservative. They're like, oh, you want to deal with my patient? Oh, what's the evidence of this, right? Or even ministries of health. And so investing a lot in clinical research, including a big project that we're doing in Europe, because the regulatory framework for digital health here doesn't even exist. So we want to be able to shape that, right? And so if you can say, hey, look, we've gone through the process in Europe, we can secure a European CE mark, it's easier to have a conversation with the respective ministries of health to kind of help them chart out what would it take to define this new field called digital therapeutics. So it's not general health and wellness like MyFitnessPal or Fitbit, but it is a therapeutic delivered digitally, right? So that's, I think, a big focus. And I think lastly, for me, it's continuing on building that product, those AI machines, so that we can take from today 1 in 400 to maybe next year 1 in 600 to 1 in 800, right? So, and that's going to require a combination of a bigger data set, but also hopefully getting smarter about, visual AI, audio AI, and how it links to behaviors, moods, motivations.
Is the team here in Malaysia right now that's developing all this?
I would say 90% here. We have teams in Singapore and Indonesia, but core engineering, dev team, data science, all here in KL. I
Nice.
think a lot of people say, yeah, there's no talent here, but you just got to go out there and fight for it, right? Because there are people that if you can get them excited about a mission that's worth it, I think talent will come.
Hey, okay, man. Thank you
Cool.
very much. Okay, Azran.
Thanks for having me.
Spending time. Yeah. So good luck with all your expansion plans and, getting more people back to mental health and physical health after that.
That's right. Awesome. Thank you for having me, Amran.
Okay, take care. Stay safe. Bye.